We're seeing a society that not only has a lot more people of lower IQ, but a lot fewer people of higher IQ. In other words, a dumbing down, a chemical dumbing down of society.
On your brain.
So everyone's sort of mediocre. That leaves them dependent on government because they can't excel. We have these people of lower IQ who are totally dependent.
On your brain.
Then we have this mass of people who are going to believe anything they're told because they can't really think clearly.
On your brain.
And very few people of very high IQ who have good cognitive function who can figure this all out. And that's what they want. So, you can kind of piece it together as to why they are so insistent in spending so many hundreds of millions of dollars of propaganda money to dumb down society.
On your brain. There is a new field of medicine called neurogastroenterology that studies the enteric nervous system, or the gut brain. Neurons are cells that communicate using electrical and chemical signals. Generally, we think of neurons as being confined to the brain or other specialized areas like the eyes or ears. What many people don't know is that there are over 100 million neurons in the tissues of the digestive system, running from the esophagus to the anus. These neurons have the job of monitoring food intake and adjusting the digestive process to meet the body's nutritional requirements. Most people fail to realize that your gut is quite literally your second brain. In addition to digesting your food, it has the ability to influence your mind, mood, and behavior. What you eat not only has a direct effect on your gut, it also has a direct effect on your brain. Most people fail to realize that your gut is quite literally your second brain. In addition to digesting your food, it has the ability to influence your mind, mood, and behavior. What you eat not only has a direct effect on your gut, it also has a direct effect on your brain, on your brain, on your brain.
This is a shift in consciousness by ordinary people who have started to re-examine the lies they were told as a child.
This is absolutely huge news.
Jest płaska. Tak jak oczekują i nie spodziewałem się co prawda tego pytania, ale zapewniam pana, że jest płaska.
Вы знаете, вот сказал, что вроде честь космонавтов, что они не говорят о том космосе. А им говорить нечего. Я об этом
кара космонавтите да говорят за това, което става в космоса. Те просто не знаят нищо такова. Ние не сме били в космоса. Ако някой твърди това, това не е вярно, не е истина.
Resist much, obey little. Once unquestioning obedience, once fully enslaved. Once fully enslaved, no nation, state, city of this earth ever afterward resumes its liberty. Given the external power structure of the society in which they function, the institutional role of the schools, for the most part, is just to train people for obedience and conformity, and to make them controllable and indoctrinated.
Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something.
What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. Do you know what I'm talking about?
If the government or NASA had said to you that the Earth is stationary, imagine that. And then imagine we are trying to convince people that no, it's not stationary. It's moving forward at 32 times rifle bullet speed and spinning at 1,000 miles per hour. We would be laughed at. We would have so many people telling us, "You're crazy. The Earth is not moving." We would be ridiculed for having no scientific backing for this convoluted moving Earth theory. And not only that, but then people would say, "Oh, then how do you explain a fixed, calm atmosphere and the sun's observable movement? How do you explain that?" Imagine saying to people, no, the atmosphere is moving also, but is somehow magically velcroed to the moving Earth. The reason is not simply because the Earth is stationary. So what we are actually doing is what makes sense. We are saying that the moving Earth theory is nonsense. The stationary Earth theory makes sense, and we are being ridiculed. You've got to picture it being the other way around to realize just how ridiculous this situation is. This theory from the government and NASA that the Earth is rotating and orbiting and leaning over and wobbling is absolute nonsense. And yet people are clinging to it tightly, like a teddy bear. They just can't bring themselves to face the possibility that the Earth is stationary, though all the evidence shows it. We feel no movement. The atmosphere hasn't been blown away. We see the sun move from east to west. Everything can be explained by a motionless Earth without bringing in all these assumptions to cover up previous assumptions gone bad. If you find from your own experience that something is a fact and it contradicts what some authority has written down, then you must abandon the authority and base your reasoning on your own findings. So investigate the subject for yourself and ask questions.
This is absolutely huge news. We've already had one cosmonaut claim that the Earth is flat. His name was Miroslav Hermajewski. Here he is getting a photograph with a flat earther, and this is a Wikipedia article on Hermajewski. Please watch his interview.
Pan tam był. Czy Ziemia rzeczywiście jest kulą zawieszoną w kosmosie?
Jest płaska. Tak jak oczekują i nie spodziewałem się co prawda tego pytania, ale zapewniam pana, że jest płaska.
Generał Mirosław Hermaszewski, jak dotąd pierwszy i ostatni Polak, który odbył lot orbitalny. Dziękuję serdecznie za rozmowę.
Dziękuję, kłaniam się.
That was awesome, but now we have a Soviet cosmonaut who has said that we have never been to space. This cosmonaut's name is Igor Petrovich Volk. Mr. Volk even received the Medal of the Hero of the Soviet Union. I have included the translation of the interview, which you can verify by clicking on the CC button on YouTube. Now please watch the interview.
Все пак вие сте герой на Съветския съюз и можем да ви вярваме.
Герой Советского Союза, мы можем верить вам.
Вы знаете, вот сказал, что вроде честь космонавтов, что они не говорят о том космосе. А им говорить нечего. Я об этом
космонавтите да говорят за това, което става в космоса. Те просто не знаят нищо такова. Ние не сме били в космоса. Ако някой твърди това, това не е вярно, не е истина.
Това е поредната хипотеза, над която ще се наложи заедно с зрителите на въпросна гледна точка да размишляваме дълго.
Хорошо.
Добре.
Это хорошо, когда
това
люди
е добре,
думают.
когато хората мислят. Това ми харесва.
Игор Петрович, благодаря ви за участието във въпросна гледна точка.
Моля.
There you have it! Two truly brave cosmonaut whistleblowers have now told you that space is fake. How much more evidence do you need?
An open letter to Neil deGrasse Tyson. Dear Mr. Tyson, I am writing to you as a former man of science that once looked up to you as an inspiring figure in a field with very few charismatic black people. You could say I was a fan. I visited the Hayden Planetarium, I watched all your lectures and television appearances, and I was struck by your ability to explain complex topics in cosmology and astrophysics in simple, concrete terms. However, your recent responses to queries regarding the flat Earth can only be categorized as arrogant, childish, and sneering.
The Earth isn't flat.
I mean, dropping a microphone somehow proves gravity?
This is called gravity.
Also, asking
At what point do you stop arguing things that have been settled for 4 centuries?
Seems ridiculous to me, since nothing in science is ever settled. Everything in science exists as a theory that only stands until a better theory comes along that more closely matches observations. Would you have told Einstein not to bother because Newton had already settled that gravity business 200 years earlier? I'm sorry, sir, but you're going to have to do much better than that. The resurgence of the flat earth is not merely a handful of tinfoil hat-wearing crazies who lack intelligence and teeth. This is a shift in consciousness by ordinary people who have started to re-examine the lies they were told as a child. Your job, sir, is to respectfully answer legitimate questions whether or not the answer supports the scientific model that you are a proponent of. Traditionally, scientific progress has not solely come out of the scientific community, but from ordinary people with a different point of view. The scientific method demands that you treat each point of view with respect, as it has the potential to overturn the existing model. And if science refuses to even entertain alternative views, then it is no longer science, but a religion of scientism. So, I would like to ask you 12 questions and give you the opportunity to answer them respectfully using simple, easy to understand concrete terms that you are so famous for. Because I'm just an ordinary bloke, nowhere near as smart as you are. So, if you could give your answers using real, tangible terms without complex mathematics, abstract concepts, or references to NASA or other data that I have no way of verifying for myself, I'd appreciate it. Question 1. Why is there land at the equator? So, you said that the Earth
throughout its life, even when it formed, it was spinning, and it got a little wider at the equator than it does at the poles. So it's not actually a sphere, it's oblate. And officially
it's an oblate spheroid, and the bulges are at the equator. So which is easier to move, rock or water? If the gravity is strong enough to prevent the water from being flung off into space, then it's strong enough to hold the much denser rock in place, so only the water should be bulging. So if the bulk of the Earth's water is at the equator, why is there land at the equator? And please don't say it's because of the height of the land. Most of Africa is flat plain, sometimes under sea level. In fact, the Danakil Desert in northeast Ethiopia is said to be the lowest place on Earth, and incidentally one of the flattest places on Earth too. Question 2. Am I able to see the curvature or not? According to you, you cannot see the curvature even from a plane because the Earth is so big.
The Earth looks flat because 1, you're not far enough away at your size. 2, your size isn't large enough relative to Earth to notice any curvature at all. It's a fundamental fact of calculus and non-Euclidean geometry. Small sections of large curved surfaces will always look flat to little creatures that crawl upon it.
But apparently you can see ships disappear over the horizon. Now, the official explanation is that you cannot see the curvature across your vision. Apparently we see a horizon about 5 miles away. So in 5 miles there's enough curvature to see a ship disappear. Yet I cannot detect that curve over 10 miles because I can see 5 miles to my left and 5 miles to my right, so I've got an uninterrupted 10-mile span in which I should see enough curve to hide 2 ships. But I don't. So if I see enough curve over 5 miles, why don't I see it over 10 miles? Following on for that, question 3, why haven't we ever seen curved water? If the Earth bends the water into a sphere around it, then if it was to freeze suddenly, we should detect a hump in the water, shouldn't we? So why is it that when Lake Baikal in Siberia freezes over, it is one of the flattest places on Earth, despite being 395 miles long and 49 miles wide. There should be a hump in the middle of it, nearly 20 miles high. So why haven't we ever seen curved water? Question 4. How are we breathing right now? How can there be a high pressure system next to a low or negative pressure system without movement from high to low? So the conventional answer is that gravity holds the air to the Earth. But if I was to evacuate a container to a fraction of the perfect vacuum of space, turn it upside down and puncture the bottom, what do you think would happen? Well, the air would rush in and fill the container. So, how does this much weaker vacuum manage to overcome the much stronger gravity near the surface? How is it that you can heat the air and it will rise against the force of gravity? Wouldn't the air leave the Earth once the sun heats the air? If gravity is the only thing holding the air to the surface of the Earth against the tendency of a high pressure system to escape to a low or negative pressure system, then when the air is heated and so is less affected by a gravitational pull, shouldn't it then succumb to the force exerted towards a region of negative pressure? If, as current scientific opinion suggests, a high pressure system can exist adjacent to a negative pressure system, then there should be a boundary condition of equilibrium where the force towards pressure equalization equals the opposing force of gravity. Thus, any change to the conditions on either side should disturb the equilibrium. Wouldn't a rising column of warm air disturb that boundary layer? So, how are we breathing right now? Question 5. Is the Earth very, very small, or is the Sun very, very near? Eratosthenes' calculation of the Earth's circumference is dependent on the light from the Sun being parallel, as it should be if the Sun is 93 million miles away. But anyone can go out on a sunny day with broken cloud and see that the light that arrives on the Earth is not parallel. The light rays come down at angles, indicating that the Sun is actually very close. Now, the official explanation is that the Earth's atmosphere refracts the Sun's light, and that's why the light comes down at diverging angles. So, if the light from the Sun is always refracted, then that would mean that Eratosthenes' calculation was made with refracted light, and therefore must be wrong, and the Earth must be much, much smaller. So which is it? It seems to me that if you still claim that Eratosthenes' calculations are correct, then the light cannot be refracted. But if the light is not refracted, then the Sun is close. And if the Sun is close, then for Eratosthenes to observe what he did, the Earth must necessarily be flat. Question 6. In a similar vein, how does a convex lens make light diverge? So again, the official explanation for diverging sun rays is that the Earth's atmosphere refracts the Sun's light like a lens. But the Earth's atmosphere is apparently a convex curve. So that would act like a convex lens and converge the light, concentrate it like a magnifying glass. You'd need a concave lens to make light diverge as we observe. Now, some have said that it is actually the angles between layers of clouds that seem to make the light diverge. But again, observation says that this is not the case. Here, there is nothing between the plane and the cloud, and the light is clearly diverging. And this NASA photograph is taken from above the clouds. And still, the Sun's proximity is apparent. So, how does the atmosphere make light diverge? Question 7. Why doesn't the artificial horizon on a plane roll backwards during straight and level flight? The artificial horizon is based on a gyroscope, and when a gyroscope spins, it resists movement away from the axis of spin.
As for rigidity in space, the spinning rotor remains in its original attitude, while the gimbals and base move around it. In other words, the gyro maintains its axis in relation to space and not to the surface of the Earth. If a gyro moves around the Earth, its axis is vertical to the Earth's surface here, at an angle here, and horizontal here. The gyro will resist any force that attempts to change its plane of rotation.
So the artificial horizon is essentially a gyroscope mounted on gimbals to allow it to stay upright as the plane pitches and rolls. So as the plane flies straight and level and rounds the curvature of the Earth, the gyroscope in the artificial horizon will remain upright with respect to where it was first spun up to speed, and the indicator will appear to roll backwards and indicate a climb. Now, I asked the pilots of the last flight I was on, and they told me that the artificial horizon has GPS and sophisticated electronics that adjust the indicator depending on where they are on Earth. But when I contacted a manufacturer, I was told that it is a purely mechanical device. No GPS, no electronics, and it hasn't changed in basic design since before the advent of electronics. So, why doesn't the artificial horizon roll backwards as they round the curvature of the Earth? Question 8. Why is the Coriolis effect so selective? This is an explanation of the Coriolis effect by a gun expert.
One of the common issues that we see is the Coriolis effect. And what guys are not doing is taking into account the effect that this can have on your shooting at longer ranges. Now, real quick, let's kind of just explain the Coriolis effect in layman's terms. The Coriolis effect is the effect that when the bullet leaves the barrel of the gun, it is actually leaving the surface of the Earth. So as the bullet leaves the barrel of the gun, the Earth is still rotating, and the bullet is not rotating with the Earth. So the Earth will actually rotate out from underneath of the bullet while it is in flight.
So bullets and artillery shells no longer rotate with the Earth when they leave the surface. And according to this explanation, paper aeroplanes act in the same way.
So imagine you were standing in Texas and had a magic paper airplane that could travel hundreds of miles. If you threw your airplane directly northward, you might think it would land straight north, maybe somewhere in Nebraska. But Texas is actually spinning around Earth's axis faster than Nebraska is, because it's closer to the equator. That means that the paper airplane is spinning faster as well, and when you throw it, that spinning momentum is conserved. So if you threw your paper airplane in a straight line toward the north, it would land somewhere to the right of Nebraska, maybe in Delaware. So from your point of view in Texas, the plane would have taken a curved path to the right.
If this is the case for bullets, artillery shells and paper airplanes, then why is it not the same for real aeroplanes? Airplanes do not aim north to go east. In fact, if aircraft no longer rotate with the Earth when they leave the surface, then east to west flights should take much longer than west to east flights. And landing on a moving runway would seem to be quite tricky. Every landing should be like this. And wouldn't there be planetary direction indicators by runways, just like there are wind direction indicators? So why is the Coriolis effect so selective? Question 9. What is the International Space Station flying over? Whatever it is, it kind of looks a bit like what I imagine the Earth to look like, but it can't be. If you choose a feature on this blue and white thing and follow it, you'll notice its speed towards the camera is constant. From the moment it appears on the horizon, it moves at the same speed until it disappears below the camera. But watch this footage from a plane. When something appears on the horizon, it moves slowly, but the closer it gets, the faster it moves. In just the same way that we see distant things move towards us in real life. Now look again at this thing. Everything is moving at the same constant speed. Now that tells me that what we're looking at does not span thousands of miles, but rather hundreds of yards. So what is it that the ISS is flying over? And while we're on the subject of the ISS, question 10. How can microgravity be selective? Watch these people bobbing around in microgravity.
Tonight our Earth will have completed another orbit around the Sun, and now we take stock of what we accomplished over the past year and what we hope to accomplish in the year ahead.
As we look back at the achievements of the past year, 2008 was the year when the space station...
Did you notice the problem? Watch it again.
As we look back at the achievements of the past year, 2008
Did you see the water
was the
drip in the background?
Past year.
In this sequence, I want you to keep your eye on the ketchup bottle once it's placed on the table. Right here you can see that there is nothing on the bottom of the bottle, no Velcro or magnets, it's just an ordinary bottle. And in a moment you'll see the ketchup bottle being placed on the table. Now keep your eye on it. See how it rocked when he nudged it? And again. And again. And again. It's clearly under the influence of so-called gravity. How can microgravity be selective? Question 11. Why are there craters on the moon? If the moon used to be much closer to the Earth, slowly moving away from us, and is tidally locked to the Earth so that only one side is ever visible, then why are there impact craters on the one side of the moon that is protected by the Earth? I am guessing that you'll repeat the same story that the moon's gravity has been protecting the Earth by hoovering up meteors and asteroids, but shouldn't the Earth's much larger gravitational field have been gathering up these meteors and asteroids and protecting the moon? So how are comets, meteors and asteroids able to pass through the Earth or avoid the Earth's gravity to be able to hit the face of the moon that's shielded by the Earth? And finally, question number 12. Why don't you find permanent hills, mountains and valleys in the ocean? The Earth is not a smooth ball, nor is it perfectly spherical. There are huge geological features such as the Mariana Trench and undersea mountain ranges. In fact, by some accounts, the Earth without the oceans actually looks like this. We observe water behaving like this, and like this, but you say it behaves like this. So why doesn't it behave like this? If the oceans are pulled to the Earth by gravity, and the strength of that gravity varies with the distance from the centre of the Earth, then why doesn't the water follow the shape of the seabed? Now, Mr. Tyson, these are legitimate questions posed to you in all seriousness. I think the questions are simple and straightforward, and I've clarified them for you. So I'd appreciate clear, straightforward answers. I am emailing you these questions, posting them on your Facebook page and YouTube channel, as well as a few other avenues. So, in the words of Douglas Adams, if you manage not to respond, I'll know that you're trying not to. I'll know that you're trying very, very hard indeed. Yours sincerely, Allegedly Dave, England.
Manera, esta es una cúpula y se va a ver así sería. Este es el cielo aquí y la cúpula así. Entonces lo que vamos a ver aquí es cómo se ve. A ver. Ese es el norte. A ver si pueden ver aquí. Ahí está el círculo donde está Polaris. Entonces hay círculos concéntricos. Cuando uno se aleja al sur, fíjense lo que pasa. No sé si se ve claramente. O sea, voy a verlo aquí. Está el círculo concéntrico. Cuando te vas alejando, parece que hubieran una clase de círculos así y otra clase de círculos para el otro lado. Cuando te vas acercando al sur. Ahí está claramente. Este es el Ecuador, vas al centro y está concéntrico. Te vas al sur y ahí empieza el fenómeno en el Ecuador, las líneas casi rectas y luego el segundo círculo para el otro lado. Centro, Polaris, y cuando se va al sur se produce el fenómeno. Ahí está. O sea, lo que estamos viendo acá lo voy a dibujar más simple. Lo que estamos viendo acá es que lo que estamos viendo allí es Polaris. Vemos esto y luego comenzamos a ver esto. Y luego comenzamos a ver esto. Eso es lo que estamos viendo. Y lo estamos probando. Es la perspectiva. Y repito, no importa en dónde estemos, siempre las estrellas.
The horizon always appears perfectly flat 360 degrees around the observer, regardless of altitude. All amateur balloon, rocket, plane, and drone footage show a completely flat horizon over 20 plus miles high. Only NASA and other government space agencies show curvature in their fake CGI photos and videos. The horizon always rises to the eye level of the observer as altitude is gained, so you never have to look down to see it. If Earth were in fact a globe, no matter how large, as you ascended, the horizon would stay fixed and the observer would have to tilt, looking down further and further to see it. Amateur balloon footage taken above the clouds has provided stunning visual proof that the sun cannot be millions of miles away. In several shots, you can see a clear hotspot reflecting on the clouds directly below the sun's spotlight-like influence. If the sun were actually millions of miles away, such a small localized hotspot could not occur.
Resist much, obey little. Once unquestioning obedience, once fully enslaved. Once fully enslaved, no nation, state, city of this earth ever afterward resumes its liberty. These were the words of caution which the great poet Walter Whitman offered to his fellow Americans. For Whitman recognized that crucial to a free and flourishing society are men and women who are willing to question and even resist authority when necessary. But today, very few of us live by the ideal espoused by Whitman. Rather, blind obedience is the norm. We have become populations of sheep, easily to be herded into the chains of tyranny. But what has led those of us in the West to largely shun the advice of Whitman? In this video, we will examine two institutions that have played an integral role in the breeding of a passive citizenry: the compulsory state-run education system, which in North America is called the public school system, and the mainstream media. Public schooling is viewed as one of the shining lights of the modern Western world. Who could question the value of an institution that provides free and compulsory education for all? But as with many institutions of our day, the textbook picture of how the institution should work greatly diverges from the reality of how it does work. If public schools taught individuals how to think, if they promoted intellectual curiosity and produced citizens healthy in body and mind, then few would question their value. But beneath the veneer presented by the bureaucrats that run this institution, a darker reality emerges. Or as John Taylor Gatto, a former teacher turned one of public schooling's greatest critics, writes, "Schools are intended to produce formulaic human beings whose behavior can be predicted and controlled. To a very great extent, schools succeed in doing this, but in a national order in which the only successful people are independent, self-reliant, confident, and individualistic, the products of schooling are irrelevant. Well-schooled people are irrelevant. They can sell film and razor blades, push paper and talk on telephones, or sit mindlessly before a flickering computer terminal. But as human beings, they are useless. Useless to others and useless to themselves." Noam Chomsky echoed this sentiment, writing in his book Understanding Power, "Given the external power structure of the society in which they function, the institutional role of the schools, for the most part, is just to train people for obedience and conformity, and to make them controllable and indoctrinated." To some this may sound like heresy, but a study of history reveals that this was the intention from the very start. The state-run school systems in the West were modeled off the factory style of education first introduced in Prussia in the early 1700s. What shocks, writes Gatto, is that we should so eagerly have adopted one of the very worst aspects of Prussian culture, an educational system deliberately designed to produce mediocre intellects, to hamstring the inner life, to deny students appreciable leadership skills, and to ensure docile and incomplete citizens, all in order to render the populace manageable. After well over a decade of indoctrination in the school system, few emerge with a great thirst for knowledge and a curiosity toward the many mysteries of the world. Instead, as Bruce Levine writes in his book Resisting Illegitimate Authority, by the time a student graduates, they have been bred to be passive, to be directed by others, to take seriously the rewards and punishments of authority, to pretend to care about things that they do not care about, and that one is impotent to change one's dissatisfying situation. But if our schooling cannot be relied upon to generate the critical and curious minds needed to protect a society from the actions of corrupted authorities, can the mainstream media play this role? While there has been an increasing skepticism toward this institution in recent years, distaste and distrust toward the mainstream media has a long history. "I have given up newspapers," wrote Thomas Jefferson, "in exchange for Tacitus and Thucydides, for Newton and Euclid, and I find myself much the happier." Nietzsche, one of the most intellectually free and curious minds of history, was also no fan of the mainstream media. "Sick are they always. They vomit their bile and call it a newspaper." Richard Weaver, a professor at the University of Chicago in the first half of the 20th century, found it ironic that while we have freed ourselves from the Earth-centered view of the cosmos, we have all the while dove headlong into an illusory view of the world created by the mainstream media. And while Weaver focuses on newspapers in the following passage, as they were the dominant medium of his day, his words are even more applicable today, where modern technology offers far better tools for the manipulation of the masses. A great point is sometimes made of the fact that modern man no longer sees above his head a revolving dome with fixed stars. True enough, but he sees something similar when he looks at his daily newspaper. The newspaper is a man-made cosmos of the world of events around us at the time. For the average reader, it is a construct with a set of significances which he no more thinks of examining than did his pious forebear of the 13th century think of questioning the cosmology. But why does the mainstream media so often choose deception over truth? Noam Chomsky in his book Media Control suggests that, like many politicians, the mainstream media is dominated by individuals who adhere to an elitist ideology. The 20th century journalist Walter Lippmann epitomized this view, calling the masses the bewildered herd, and suggesting that one of the main functions of the media is to put this herd in its proper place as passive spectators, not active participants, in the organization of a society. Or as Chomsky explains, this elitist ideology is built on the notion that the mass of the public are just too stupid to be able to understand things. If they try to participate in managing their own affairs, they're just going to cause trouble. Therefore, it would be immoral and improper to permit them to do this. We have to tame the bewildered herd, not allow the bewildered herd to rage and trample and destroy things. For those of us who are not among the self-anointed elite, the question arises as to whether the controlling of the bewildered herd is done in order to promote a prosperous and flourishing society, or merely to maintain certain institutional structures which favor the elites to the detriment of society at large. This open question only reinforces the need for a more skeptical attitude toward the authority figures of our day. We need, in other words, more anti-authoritarians. It must be stressed that an anti-authoritarian is not someone who, in place of a passive acceptance of authority, adopts a passive rejection of all authority. Many institutions and authority figures serve a beneficial purpose, and therefore should be accepted. But anti-authoritarians recognize that consensus does not mean truth, that power corrupts, that people lie, and that some institutions, in the words of Chomsky, have no moral justification. They are just there in order to preserve certain structures of power and domination. Recognizing these undeniable facts, the anti-authoritarian is willing to look at all authority figures with a healthy dose of skepticism, and potentially even resist their commands if such authority proves corrupt and harmful to the well-being of a society. Or as Henry David Thoreau wrote, "If the machine of government is of such a nature that it requires you to be the agent of injustice to another, then, I say, break the law." But should we fear a world with more anti-authoritarians? The obedience bred into us in school and the blind deference to authority promoted by the talking heads of the mainstream media may lead some to view anti-authoritarians as a threat to the stability of society. But nothing could be further from the truth. Anti-authoritarians are the crucial protectors of a flourishing society, for as the author C.P. Snow noted, "When you think of the long and gloomy history of man, you will find more hideous crimes have been committed in the name of obedience than have ever been committed in the name of rebellion." Malevolent authority, combined with a passive citizenry, is the recipe for tyranny, and so anti-authoritarians should not be feared or ostracized. They should be welcomed. They are the individuals who raise the alarm and awaken the slumbering masses to the existence of corrupt authority. A society without a healthy number of anti-authoritarians, or a society in which anti-authoritarians are shunned and silenced, is a society that has chosen the comfort of illusions over the desire for truth, and is therefore a society paving the way for its own destruction. Or as the 18th century French philosopher Voltaire cautioned, "So long as the people do not care to exercise their freedom, those who wish to tyrannize will do so. For tyrants are active and ardent, and will devote themselves in the name of any number of gods, religious or otherwise, to put shackles upon sleeping men."
There are a lot of us that have been showing this stuff for years, and people are waking up to the deception, while some refuse to acknowledge it. In fact, many people hold the idea of outer space and NASA very near and dear to their hearts. So much so that when they are shown this evidence, their ego won't allow them to accept that space is a hoax. Years of psychological programming through various media doesn't help either. But whether we like it or not, NASA and all the other space agencies are lying to the world. They're lying to you. They're lying to your kids.
In case you find these videos useful, please share them with others so we can help them too. Subscribe and hit the bell icon for more videos and updates. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time. Peace.